That's it. It looks like we're going. All right. Yeah, we are. We've got somebody viewing. Excellent. So had a little bit of Facebook Live trouble, but that's okay. It looks like we have got it fixed and got it wrapped up. Welcome to Parents Helping Parents virtual chapter and live webinar. We are a group of parents, grandparents, volunteers, friends. Now we're having some sound problems. Got that taken care of. Working on the fly. A group of volunteers, parents, grandparents, friends, someone of any age who's dealing with a substance use disorder in some form. Our mission is really simple: caring parents, offering hope through resources, education, and shared experiences. The virtual chapter is a little bit different from our live in-person meetings, and it is streamed live on Facebook and through a private Zoom webinar room to protect your anonymity. The links for the Zoom webinar room, you can find them on our website at parentshelpingparents.info or on our Facebook page at Parents Helping Parents, Inc. We only have one rule here. What is said here stays here. So please feel free to share, ask questions. We don't point fingers or judge. We just support. Many of us in the past have had the same questions and the same experiences, and a few of us have been able to find some answers. So we try to listen, we try to share our experiences, the things we've learned on our journey, and the resources that we've been able to uncover along the way. We have no professional expertise. We have only walked in the shoes of a parent. Our mission is limited to providing information, resources, and peer support. This meeting or any outreach of Parents Helping Parents, or any outreach that Parents Helping Parents offers, should never be considered a substitute for professional counseling, legal, financial, or medical services, all of which we recommend you seek if it's appropriate for your needs. In addition, we love that you're joining us for the virtual meeting, and we love that we can do this for families and loved ones who are unable to attend one of our live chapters. But I do want to encourage you, if at all possible, to connect with one of the local chapters. There is no better support than a community of parents kind of gathering together to support one another. So during the course of tonight's meeting, feel free to comment and ask questions. You can do so in the comment section live on Facebook, or if you're watching in Zoom, you can post a question to chat. If you're in Zoom, you can do that two ways. You can post the question privately, directly to me, the moderator or host, or you can post that question so that the entire viewing audience can read it. If you're on Facebook, we encourage you to like and share the stream as we're going live this evening. If you would like to be on our undisclosed email list, please comment your email on Facebook or in the Zoom chat. And you'll only receive notices of our quarterly newsletter. We don't hit with a bunch of spam. It's really just a way to stay connected with what we're doing and what events we might have coming up. If you'd like to participate as a volunteer, help with meetings, help with speakers, get trained to answer our helpline, to help spread the word about chapters, or lots of other opportunities, let us know via comment or chat. We can always use the help of additional volunteers. So our next meeting is going to be on July 1st at 7 p.m. Our speaker, Patty Mason, an addiction therapist and wellness coach, will be discussing self-care and family wellness. So make plans to join us and let others know about that meeting coming up on July 1st. The best way to stay in touch and to spread the word about the virtual chapter is following us on Facebook and sharing our content. So tonight's speaker is Stephanie Morcom. She is an outreach coordinator for Ambrosia Treatment Center and is also a case manager and interventionist for Life Choice Interventions. And she's going to be talking about the power of family in recovery and in intervention. So I'm going to send you her direction, and we're going to get this party started.
Am I good?
You're good.
I just want to thank you guys for watching, and also express my gratitude for Parents Helping Parents and everything they do. I'm so grateful that families have that group to turn to when they need encouragement and support. And so thank you guys for letting me do this. So as Derek said, my name is Stephanie, and I'm an outreach coordinator with Ambrosia Treatment Center. So Ambrosia Treatment Center is an out-of-state substance abuse and co-occurring disorder treatment facility. We have 4 facilities, 2 in South Florida, one in Beverly Hills, California, and one in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And so what I want to show you guys about Ambrosia and tie this into what I'm going to be talking about is our family wellness program. When we have a client enter into Ambrosia, they are wrapped around in our family wellness program for the rest of their lives. They can lean on the therapist there and continue to get support around addiction and also how to support their loved one in recovery. And I think that goes nicely with what I'm going to talk to you guys about. I also am working on my certified case manager interventionist certification. And so what I do is we do interventions in case management. And so I want to start off with telling you guys my story. There's parts of my story that I think can tie in nicely. And I want you guys to understand my passion and kind of just know a little about me. So I'm 37 years old. I have just about 5 years sober from prescription painkillers for the most part. So I grew up in a great family. My dad is a minister at a church. So I grew up being at church every time the doors were open. And that was just how I lived my life. I don't have any huge adverse childhood experiences. My life was pretty normal, so to speak, growing up. And so when I was in high school, of course, I was your typical high school person. I rebelled against having to be at church all the time. I also partied with my friends. I wanted to fit in with the popular crowd. And so I did dabble in drugs and alcohol in high school. I don't think that's where my addiction started. I got married just a month after I graduated high school. I always tell my parents, why did you let me do that? The truth is I would have done that with or without their blessing. And so we got married. We were married for probably about a year. And that's when I got pregnant with my daughter, who's now 17, which I can't believe. But, and so we were young and immature and didn't really know how to be in a relationship. And so that marriage unfortunately ended in divorce. And I moved back in with my mom and dad. They converted a garage into an apartment and we lived there. Probably about 7 months after my divorce was final, I got remarried. And I got remarried to a minister. And I think I felt like that was the answer to all my problems. I, at the time, had a real fear about being single alone forever with a baby. And so I felt like that was just going to solve everything. And my life would be perfect. Shortly after I got remarried, I was diagnosed with moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis. And as many of you may know, that's a disease that affects the lining in your joints, and it can be painful. When I went to the doctor, I thought I had just jammed my thumb. It was swollen. I was an active person, and I thought maybe I just had an injury. But my orthopedic doctor told me I needed to see a rheumatologist. And from there, I think that's where my addiction started. And so I was started on just a low dose pain medication. I think I was just taking Lortab every so often. And it wasn't really a problem for me then. But my marriage slowly began to be abusive emotionally and physically. And I think for me, I began to self-medicate, because if pain medication takes your physical pain away, it's going to make your emotional pain better, right? And I think as addicts, we don't want to feel our feelings. And so we use and we self-medicate to cover that up. And I had the perfect path to be able to do that. And so as my arthritis progressed and even as my stress in my life got worse, of course, stress aggravates an autoimmune disorder. And so I would be back at the doctor and my dose would increase and increase until finally I was on a significant dose of OxyContin extended release, also taking immediate release. And then I was having anxiety issues. So I was taking Klonopin, I was taking Soma, And then I was taking Ambien to help me sleep and Adderall to help me focus. So I was on a pretty hefty cocktail of drugs that now they don't even prescribe. It's a deadly cocktail. And so I, of course, would run out of my script early, have to manipulate my doctor into refilling it early, think of some reason why it needed to be done. And I just continued in that cycle. I continued in that cycle through a pregnancy with my son. Of course, my doctors monitored the amount I was on during that. My son was born healthy, but I continued to live in that cycle and nothing really slowed me down. Finally, my husband at the time and my parents felt like I had a problem and I needed some help. And so I went to my first treatment center. And I somehow manipulated the doctors into believing that my condition was so chronic that I actually needed to stay on my pain medication. And so I left there with the doctor's permission to stay on the meds I was taking. And to me, I think that was a notch in my belt of, I'm not the one with the problem. You guys are the one with the problem. And I just continued to spiral. That marriage, ended in divorce. And I ended up back with my daughter in the converted garage apartment with my parents. So I continued to kind of manage my life the best I could. I finished college. I would hold down jobs off and on for a period of time. There were times where I actually had my own place and I lived on my own, but my life was unmanageable and I couldn't hold that down for very long. I would get fired from my job or something would happen, and I always ended up back at mom and dad's. I went to treatment several times in the period of years that I lived with them. My daughter grew up with IMSA coming to the house in the middle of the night because I had overdosed. I remember her stepping over me one night to go to my parents' room to get in their bed. Most kids would probably have been worried, like, what's going on with mom? But she was so used to that chaos that felt normal to her. And so one of my overdoses landed me in ICU on a ventilator for a week. But even after that, I wasn't ready to get help. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. And what that means is the begging and pleading of my mom and dad or my daughter or my friends and family to get better wasn't enough. I wasn't ready to change. And so their begging and pleading and crying was not going to motivate me there. And I think that that's hard because when you're in pain, you want other people to understand that. But when we're in active addiction, we can't go there with you. And I think I can recognize now that was hard on my parents. And so in 2014, I was still going through these periods of treatment home. I tried to be on Suboxone maintenance. I wasn't ready for that either. I ended up selling my Suboxone strips for money to buy pills. I was stealing my dad's medication, who had cancer at the time. I was stealing my mom's medication. If I was in your house, I would probably end up in your bathroom to see if you had medication that I could take. And I continued to just spiral and spiral. So in 2014 is when I had my first real run-in with the law. I was arrested for driving under the influence of drugs and also for possession. I had my own prescriptions, but I couldn't account for all the other prescriptions that were in my car. And that was a felony narcotics charge against me. And so I stayed in jail for the night. Of course, they had to take me to the emergency room to be cleared for observation before. I was pretty out of it. I don't even remember that. And my mom and dad came and got me out the next day. And looking back now, when I talk to families, I always say, don't go get them out of jail. But I think in that moment, they were so scared for me, and that's somewhere I had never been, that they didn't know what to do except for to help. My family were making decisions because they wanted to keep me alive, and they didn't realize that what they were doing was actually prolonging the state I was in. Their inability to let me hit a bottom was keeping me sicker longer. And so shortly after I was arrested and back home again, I overdosed again. And I remember my dad telling me, you're sick and you need help. And looking back on that now, I think that was his way of saying, we don't know what to do, but you have a problem and we can't help you with it. After I was discharged from the hospital at that time, my parents finally drew a line in the sand and they said, we don't know what you're going to do, but you can't do it here. And for me, that was the first time they had ever said no. Of course, they had gotten upset with me and been, they didn't trust me, and I knew that, but they had never told me, no, you can't stay here. And so the summer of 2014, I entered my last and final treatment center. And so I think the major thing that changed was that they said no, they stopped enabling. And I think we talk about that a lot with families, boundaries, because boundaries don't always feel like love. Sometimes enabling someone feels like we're loving them, but we're actually hurting them. I used to tell now I can look back and tell my parents that they were loving me to death while I was in my addiction. When they said no to me, that didn't feel like love to me. It made me mad. But in the end, that's what saved my life. And so I went to treatment, and they had told me I had to do 90 days somewhere. So I had thought that I would do treatment and then go somewhere for 60 days and then get to come home. And so what happened is I went to treatment and then I went to sober living. And I think for me, sober living is where the magic happened. That's where I learned to be an adult, to be a productive member of society, to be accountable, and to be a grown-up. And so, I was planning on leaving sober living on day 89 at midnight and coming home. And that's not what happened. And during sober living, I had a lot of rude wake-up calls, if you will. I was continually calling my parents every time I had a toothache or a headache or something didn't go my way. And I was constantly keeping them in turmoil. Even though I was in a safe place, they couldn't rest. And so what happened is they blocked my number. And I didn't like that. I felt like I had been sent away because they didn't want to take care of me. And at the time, I felt like it wasn't love. So I just started calling the church because I knew the secretaries would put me through to my dad. And that worked until it didn't. And so I think that break from me is what they needed. And now looking back, I know that's what I needed. I was using them as a crutch to not get better. And so I completed my program at Sober Living, and then I became a house manager. And I think that was the best thing that I could have done. It taught me to be accountable to someone else, and it taught me boundaries. It taught me what my boundaries were and what other people's boundaries were. And it taught me how to hold people accountable. And I stayed there for 2 years. And I think the major takeaways about my story, the things that I want parents to hear, is that I didn't get better until they finally said no. And the word no is a complete sentence. You can say no without having to have an explanation. And so today, I work at Ambrosia, as I mentioned, but I also work with Life Choice Interventions and Case Management. And so what we do is interventions and case management. And so the word intervene means to interrupt. And I'm gonna read you guys the definition of intervention. So an intervention is an orchestrated effort by one or often many people to encourage someone to seek professional help with an addiction. And the addiction doesn't have to be substance abuse. We can intervene on someone in any kind of a crisis. So it could be gambling, sex, food. There's a lot of different ways that we can do an intervention. So Intervention is not just about getting your loved one or the client to treatment, but it's about engaging them in a process of lifelong recovery. And so what we do in an intervention is we help raise the bottom for the addict so that we can motivate them to get to treatment. And so intervention minimizes the natural progression of consequences. So we want to interrupt something that's going on to prevent it from getting worse. And so when someone calls about their loved one or their child, we want to gather as much information as we can. So we want to know, why are you calling? What happened that initiated this call? A lot of times people don't call for an intervention until it's like a major crisis. So if you look at addiction like cancer, there's like the first, second, third, and fourth stage. Well, there's not a fifth stage. Most people don't call for an intervention until they're like in the fourth stage of the disease. And so we want to know what happened. What are they using? Have they been to treatment? If they've been to treatment, what did that look like? What's going on with the family and also what's going on with the client. We want to find out who all in the family system needs to be involved in the intervention. So sometimes we might ask, who would be in the first 2 rows of your loved one's funeral? Those people might need to be involved in the intervention. They might not all be, but some of them may need to be there. And so, we got to figure out who needs to be on the intervention team. Who's going to be that support system for the loved one. And so then we would set up what is called a pre-intervention. And so at the pre-intervention, everyone that will be at the intervention will be there. In the background, we will already have been talking with each person to see how the addiction has impacted them, and find out kind of what their side of the story is so that we can bring that all to everybody at the table. And so at the pre-intervention, we're going to want to know, what are the client's strengths and what are their deficits, and what traits do they have that have enabled them to continue using and or relapsing. And so we're going to also talk to them. Do they have co-occurring or mental health disorders? Do they have trauma? 2/3 of all addiction stems from trauma. And so we're going to talk about all those things. And then we're going to educate the family and the team on the disease of addiction. So a simple definition for addiction, and I'm sure you guys know this, is the repeated or compulsive misuse of substances despite negative consequences. And so I think it's important for the family to be there as one, because in a one-on-one with an addict, you're always going to lose. When you have a family unit together, it's much harder to be dismissed and put away because you're there as a unit. And so you guys can conquer that together. And so entering into recovery for someone requires a network of people to hold the client accountable and to set healthy boundaries. And so the family is now that team. The family is now that team that's going to hold them accountable and set those boundaries. And so we're going to talk with the family about what has your part been in the addiction, if any. Who's the codependent in the family? Codependency kills more addicts than the disease itself. So we want to identify who is the codependent in the family and what can we do to help intervene on that person, if you will. And so we're going to want to know, is there other people in the family that use? We might do a genogram with the family to kind of figure out the system. And we're going to talk about addiction as a family disease. So addiction only thrives within family systems with unhealthy boundaries. So learning to set limits with your loved one is one of the most important things that you can do. And how we're going to motivate them to treatment is through motivators, consequences, and leverage. initially your loved one might require some external motivation to get them to treatment. While they're in treatment, they may require external motivation to keep them there. And so we call this bottom lines. And so when we look at bottom lines with someone, we might look at what are the 5 most important things to your loved one. It could be their home, their work, their kids, college, their dog. Those could vary, but we want to identify those. And then we use the HELPS approach. And so we look at the H is for health. So what health consequences does your loved one have? Environmental. What environmental consequences do they have? The L is for legal. So what legal consequences do they have? The P is for personal and financial. And lastly, the S is for spiritual. And I think when I think about spiritual, I usually think for me, when I was using, I was constantly violating my own ethics and morals. Even though I knew it was wrong, I was stuck in that cycle. And so usually when I think about the spiritual, I try to relate that to myself. And so what we're trying to do in all of this is create a rock bottom, and then we're going to use the family to help pick them up from that rock bottom. And so the list of consequences and bottom lines is going to motivate them to treatment. And from the list, we're going to create what we call a family recovery plan. And that's exactly how it sounds. It's a plan of recovery for the family. And so we're going to identify what's expected of your child or your loved one. What do we want them to do? Do we want them to complete, 30 days of treatment and then IOP and sober living? We're going to list all of those things out very detailed so that the client knows exactly what is expected of them. And then we're going to include the bottom lines. And so usually we use a ladder approach. So we start with the least impactful consequences, and we move up to the higher consequences until they say yes to going. And so in the family recovery plan, we're going to also list the bottom lines and consequences. So your loved one knows exactly what's expected of them, and they know exactly what's going to happen if they refuse to go. In the pre-intervention, we usually have the family write letters to their loved one. And the letters are pretty simple and to the point. They don't have to be super huge. They're not to shame or be negative, but they're usually just, you state what's going on, how it's affected you and what you want to see happen. You want to, talk about what it used to be like and express some memories. You want to show some painful things that have affected you and how that makes you feel. And then we want to talk about what we want to happen. We want them to say yes to getting help. And so the family recovery plan is not only for the addict or the identified patient or your child, it's for the family. And so what we're going to do is we're going to identify what resources does the family need. Do mom and dad need to, go to Parents Helping Parents meetings or CODA meetings? Do we need to engage the family in Al-Anon or therapy? Because the perfect situation and the ideal process is that the family heals while your loved one is healing. We want everyone to get better together. And so getting them to treatment is only the beginning of the process. That's just where it starts. Treatment, as you guys know, is a stabilization period. There's a lot of things that need to happen after that. And so what we want is to engage the whole family in a process where everyone is getting better together. And we want the family to stay well, whether the addict decides they're going to get help or not. The healthier the family is, the stronger boundaries they have and their ability to stick to those boundaries is really what's going to, keep their loved one sober. It's going to, or help them get sober. Because, like my story, I didn't really get help till my parents said no. And I think that's true for a lot of people. We can't survive out there on our own without our family. And at some point, the hope is that your addict will come around, and we use a whole lot of leverage. It could be all kinds of things, cutting off financial support, not allowing them in your home, calling the police if necessary. So we try to use as much as we can to motivate them to get there. But like I said, that's just the first steps. So the next thing I wanted to kind of talk to you guys is case management. And I think that that's one of the huge important things. So case management is a flexible continuum of care. And so what we're doing is we're keeping the client plugged into necessary resources to support them for a long period of time. And we're adjusting that treatment plan as needed over that period of time. And so I want to give you guys some statistics. So at the end of a year, only 3 to 7% of people that completed a 30-day inpatient treatment stay with no aftercare remain sober. 40 to 60% of people that complete inpatient treatment relapse within a short period of time. So if we look at other programs and what they're doing right, more comprehensive programs to recovery management, we can find statistics of 79 to 92%. And that's what we all want, right? We want the 79 to 92% success rate. And so in these programs, the participants are sober after 5 to 10 years of participating. And these are the programs like the physician's health programs, the airline pilot programs, some drug court programs, and the nursing programs. And so these programs utilize intervention, evaluation, detox, 90-day residential treatment, individual and group counseling, 12-step meetings, and peer support groups. They use random drug testing and relapse prevention. And we do a lot of that when we send someone to treatment, but there's parts that are missing. And so what these programs do is they use a carrot and stick approach. So the carrot is getting to keep your license, getting to be able to fly a plane, to practice medicine, to be a nurse. That's the reward, right? That's the carrot in the scenario. The stick is not being able to keep your license or practice medicine again or fly a plane. So, they have motivators and consequences in that. So these licensing boards support the participants in achieving long-term recovery by creating wraparound services. And they're constantly monitoring recovering individuals. They use benchmarks of success in each phase of recovery and consequences for a failure. So if they fail a drug test, there's a consequence, right? If they do well, they get more privileges. And they're constantly being modified as needed. And so what we want to do in intervention and case management is create a board of recovery. And that's like the board of family. So the family becomes that person's licensing board, if you will. So with case management, the family's the licensing board. And as a case manager, we're acting as the hub and the wheel of recovery. So, if you picture a wheel, case management is in the middle of that wheel. And we're constantly communicating with the treatment center team, with their family, with their psychiatrist, with the sponsor. They're having to take random drug tests. We're communicating with their therapist, and we're ensuring that they're attending 12-step meetings. So with constant communication with our clients on a regular and daily basis, with constant communication with the family, with their therapist and their sponsor for accountability, we're able to wrap around them and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so case managers are able to provide the resources that are needed to that individual, but we're not only case managing that client, we're also helping the family. So does the family need to be engaged in more resources? What can we do to support the family throughout this? Because like I said earlier, the idea is that we bring the whole family system into a point of recovery. And so I think for me, where the magic happens is being able to see a family system recover and their loved one get the help they need. And I think, if we're all able to use the tools that we have and get someone to treatment, we all need the resources that we can need, right? And we want everyone to have those statistics. And, a treatment center isn't always able to provide all of those things for a super long period of time, but there are a lot of other resources out there that can. And I just, that's important for me, is to see the family get better and also the addict get better. And so if you guys have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. I'm always available to help however I can. And so I hope you guys have some questions. I like questions.
So the first question is, what would you suggest somebody do if they needed help and asked for help, but their family was unwilling to help them get help?
Okay. So an addict wants help, but their family isn't willing to help them.
Isn't supportive of help, yeah.
So I think if someone's in a position where they want help, we can help them. There's got to be people in their life that will support them, even if it's a friend or a colleague. And so I think if they want help, that's the biggest thing. That's like, the golden ticket, right? Is them wanting to get better. And so, yeah.
We're just doing open Q&A for anybody that is watching on Facebook or Zoom. So feel free to comment your questions or chat your questions. We would love to answer those. This is the awkward silence part.
Not everyone at once.
Right. Oh, here's one. Somebody just said thank you for sharing your story.
Oh yeah, cool.
If someone becomes the weak link in the family, how do you bolster them up?
Okay, so I think if we have a weak link in the family, and I'm assuming you mean someone that's not supportive of the person getting treatment or the person that's enabling them the most, maybe that's what you mean. I think what we do is we try to engage them in services. So if we have someone that's really codependent, really enabling, we want to get them help too. And there's a lot of different resources we can use to get that. We might want them to be in therapy. We might want them to go to meetings. But we want to identify that person and basically we intervene on them. So we can use that same family system to encourage them, but also intervene on them at the same time so that they're not the hindrance to the loved one getting help.
Good answer. Feel free to answer this if you would like.
Sure.
It's more of a personal question.
That's okay.
What do you do now to manage and take care of your pain?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, so
if you want to answer it.
Yeah, so someone asked, what do I do now to manage and control my pain? So I still have rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know if you guys can see my hands. So I do take steroids like prednisone as needed. I also take ibuprofen and Tylenol. To be honest, after I got sober, so when we use, and some people may know this, painkillers, our body basically puts us in more pain because it stops creating the pain receptors that we naturally have. So the period of time when I quit, it was not easy because I hurt more everywhere because my body wasn't used to me just dumping OxyContin in it. So over time, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that we straighten out mentally and physically. And I love that because I think it's true. So over time, my pain got better and more tolerable. And what I came to realize is like, I actually wasn't in as much pain as I thought I was. So there was a time I was taking more pain medication than my dad with cancer. And that was just the disease of addiction, right? I thought I needed more and more and more. So I don't honestly hurt that bad. So I get swelling and I take steroids. I take once a month infusions to kind of keep my RA at bay. But I'm good with just ibuprofen and Tylenol. So that might not be the case forever for me. But right now that works just fine. So that's kind of where I stay.
I'm reading through this question.
Oh, yeah.
I like to preview them to make sure I ask it right.
But that's a good question because I get that a lot.
So this question is concerning an 18-year-old child who is in active addiction, who has left the state once, sounds like kind of going on a bender, and is threatening to do that again. Would you intervene or treat someone at 18 differently than you would a 28-year-old? And then it just lays the caveat that she seems to be spiraling kind of deeper and deeper and refuses inpatient.
Sure. So, I think at 18, you're an adult. And so I think as an 18-year-old, as a mom and dad of an 18-year-old, the family definitely has more leverage because you're probably helping out more financially, more in a lot of regards than maybe a 28-year-old. So I think we do it the same. We want to hit hard and fast and get them into treatment and get them into recovery, and also the family into recovery. And so it's going to be different, but they're an adult now. And so, we want to make an impact where we can, when we can. I just think the leverage and the consequences and motivators might be different. So I would say that we would do it the same.
Yeah. This might be a good time to mention for the person that asked that question that we're connected with the Partnership for Drug-Free, the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, as an organization. And the partnership offers parent coaching that is free, that can help connect parents with a live coach to kind of talk through some of these issues and get some additional support. And you can find that information on our website. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Good question. Thank you. Any others?
I probably talked way too fast.
I think that's a very valid question. Why aren't more people watching? More people should be watching.
Yeah.
I don't know how long to wait. Oh, here we go. Do your interventionists travel to work with families from your treatment center or locations, or do you have to use local interventionists?
So actually, Life Choice Interventions, we serve Texas and Oklahoma, but we do travel. And so usually what that looks like is we do the first call with the family over the phone. At Life Choice, consultations are free. And so we'll gather all that information, and then we will, do all of our background investigating and calls with the family after we identify who needs to be at the pre-intervention. And what we would do is probably do the pre-intervention the night before the intervention and just travel there and arrange all of that so that it made sense for family that might be out of town or not. So yes, we can travel.
Good stuff. Here's another. Did your parents ever try intervention with you?
So no. It's funny. My parents today are like, I wish they would have had Parents Helping Parents when you were using. So no, they didn't. I think that they I don't know what happened with my dad, but he just like something snapped in him and they drew a line in the sand. And for me, knowing that I had nowhere to live and no one to help me out, that was enough. And so I agreed to go to treatment. And so that was their boundary. And that's what we try to help families do, is create that boundary. And for me, with my dad at the time, that boundary worked. I think if it wouldn't have, though, I would have been a prime candidate for an intervention.
Good. Thank you for that question. Any other questions as we're beginning to wrap up? We don't want to miss your opportunity.
And so while we're waiting, I do want to mention, so at Life Choice Intervention, so I mentioned that we do case management. So we obviously do family intervention services. We offer family support services, treatment recommendations, and placement. Generally, when we do an intervention, we're going to give the family options for a treatment center that makes sense for them financially, with the insurance and all those things. So we give recommendations, and then we also provide supervised transport for the client to the treatment center so that they get there safely without concern. So,
as a part of your parents' tactics and working with you to get you help, did they ever cut off communication with you?
yes.
Was that effective?
So they actually did it after I got out of treatment, because I might have been not using drugs, but I was still the same crazy person. And I was constantly keeping them in turmoil, like calling multiple times a day, crying or complaining. And so, yes, they cut off all they blocked my number. For about 3 weeks, I had no contact. And yes, I think it was effective because it gave them a break. It wasn't just effective for me, but it gave me it was kind of forced upon me, but it gave me space and time to focus on myself and figure things out. And we use that as a consequence a lot in intervention, is cutting off ties and communication, especially if their loved one is refusing treatment, or if the loved one leaves treatment early or stops engaging in their treatment plan.
What is the minimum age for your services? And answer that both for Ambrosia and for Life Choice.
Yeah, sure. So Ambrosia Treatment Center, we are adults, so 18 and older. We do have like a young adult location, and then we have a location that's 35 and above. And so to be at Ambrosia, it's 18 and older. They have to legally be an adult. So for Life Choice Interventions, we can intervene on youth or teenagers. We can still create, there's still motivators and consequences to a teenager, and we can still create consequences within that family unit. So,
how would a private counseling office go about sending you a referral to Ambrosia or to Life Choice?
Sure. So you can just call me or email me, and I can probably somehow leave my email. I can just tell it to you.
Do you want me to put it in the comments?
Yeah,
right
it would be cool if,
Yeah.
So it's Stephanie,
PHNIE.
ANIE,
Yeah.
at lifechoiceinterventions.com. And you can put my phone number on there. I think Derek is putting it on the comments, so.
I am. And while I'm doing that, just another thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, sure. Hey, I think when we tell our stories, it gives other people hope. And I think at the end of the day, like, that's what this is all about, is inspiring people and giving them hope, because people get better every single day. And I'm grateful for that. So thank you guys for letting me share it.
So your email and phone number is in the comments section on Facebook. So if people are watching on Zoom, they need to go to the comments on Facebook to get that info. Here's another one. Would you suggest parents to call an outpatient treatment center judge or patrol officer if their child relapses?
So I guess we're talking about an adult child.
I'm assuming we're talking about an adult child.
Okay, so so if they relapse and you're going to call a judge or an officer, I'm assuming they're violating a court order. I think both of those things would probably get their attention and force their hand into getting help. And I think that it's also good for you to reach out if they have the resources to be able to get back into treatment or outpatient treatment. I think that that's a good thing as well, especially if they're willing to do that. Relapse doesn't have to happen, but it happens a lot. And people can come back from a relapse. Depending on how long they've been out there and what's going on, they may not have to go back to residential treatment. So I don't think it's a bad idea to get them back into a treatment type of placement, even if that's outpatient. But if they're a danger to themselves or others, I also don't think it's a bad idea to call the police, especially if they're putting you in danger. That might be the wake-up call that they need sometimes.
I would also just add that from my perspective, anybody that's coming out of residential treatment needs to be engaged in outpatient services for a set length of time anyway. That's my clinical opinion, that even if somebody's in sober living, that should be done in conjunction with outpatient care for a certain duration of time, because I think that increases rates of success. Sure. The longer we can keep someone engaged in a service, whether it's outpatient, case management, sober living, the longer they're engaged in something, the better chances they have.
Yeah. Like, I know we usually always want to keep that person wrapped in services for at least a year. And like Derek said, that could be detox, residential, outpatient, sober living, but we want them engaged in some kind of a therapeutic service for as long as we can.
Yeah. Good stuff. Any final questions before we wrap things up? Going once. Going twice. All right, you're officially off camera. So, thank you everybody for joining us for the chapter, the webinar, whatever we want to call it. Thank you, Stephanie, for being here, for sharing your story, for sharing all the information with us. For those of you that are watching, that may be struggling, that may have a family member struggling, I will just say this. One, ask for help. Reach out to someone that might be able to help. On the Parents Helping Parents website, get the text line phone number from them, find their local chapter, get connected with somebody from a 12-step support group, whatever that looks like, whoever it is you need to ask for help. Reach out. There are people that are out there that are willing to help you. If you don't know who to reach out to or who to contact, get on our website, find that phone number and give us a call. We would love to connect you or help connect you with somebody in your area for you to get some help. Thanks for watching. Join us 2 weeks from tonight. Actually, I don't think it's 2 weeks from tonight. I think it's 3 weeks, because I think there's a 5th week in June. However long it is, join us on Monday, July the 1st at 7 p.m. for our next meeting with Patty Mason to talk about family self-care and wellness. Thank you everybody for joining us. Have a great week. Enjoy the rest of your Monday.